You are listening to the Business of Podcast, a show that brings you conversations with global research scholars and academicians from around the world. I'm Deepak, your host from India. Today we have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Anandasivam Gopal as our distinguished guest on the podcast. Dr. Anandasivam Gopal is the President's Chair of Information Systems and Innovation at Nanyang Business School, Singapore, and previously served as the Dean's Professor of Information System at the Robert H. Smith School of Business, University of Maryland. His research focuses on technology platforms, contracts, and entrepreneurship, with projects spanning tech-based entrepreneurship, secondary markets for technology products, mobile platforms, and healthcare. He also worked with PRTM, later acquired by PwC, in high-tech strategy and operations consulting, and his work has been featured in outlets including the New York Times, Forbes, and the Boston Globes. He holds an MSIA and PhD from Tepper School of Business, Carnegie Mellon University, along with degrees from UNC Chapel Hill and BITS Pilani. In today's episode, Professor Anandasivam Gopal discusses his research, Dancing to the Hashtag Challenge, the effect of TikTok on closing the artist-gender gap in the music industry. Now, without keeping you waiting any longer, let us warmly welcome Professor Anandasivam Gopal to the conversation. Professor Anandasivam, it is a privilege to have you with us today, and we are truly grateful for the time you have taken here.
Thank you very much, Deepak. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Professor, what exactly counts as a hashtag dance challenge in your
All right.
study? And what makes HDCs a distinction promotion mechanism compared to other TikTok trends?
Mm. Okay, so a hashtag dance challenge is essentially think about it in this way, right? Supposing you were to pick up a song that you like and you decided to set it to some distinctive move dance steps. And you posted a 30-second or a 45-second video of you dancing to the song that you like on TikTok, and you gave it a hashtag. And then you also issued a dance challenge, essentially saying everybody on the platform can copy the same dance steps to the same music and post it on TikTok for other people to see. And all of these videos are commonly linked by the common hashtag, right? So it's it's sort of an interesting phenomenon because at some point, why does it exist? There is really no reason for a hashtag dance challenge to exist, right? It's one of those things that sort of artificially came up. My guess is a bunch of kids decided to do this. They picked up a popular dance, like a Michael Jackson dance piece or a Taylor Swift dance piece, and they came together with like a 30-second video, and this became a thing. It became a phenomenon. So essentially, these hashtag dance challenges are just a series of these where there is original music, uh, short clips, 30-second clips. There's dance associated with that music, and this dance is usually sort of a set of attractive steps. And then a whole bunch of people follow that same dance to the same music and link these videos. So if you are on TikTok, you can actually pick up a dance challenge and you can scroll through all of the different people doing the same steps, and you can comment on it, and you can sort of contribute your own dance steps to that music and become part of that chain. So it's an it's an interesting phenomenon. Actually, I'm not on TikTok myself. I must admit, I'm completely the wrong generation for this kind of stuff. But it was brought to my attention by my PhD student at that point, Yifei Wong, who's the first author of the paper. She is a musician, and she is also on TikTok. And so she came up with this idea of saying, have you checked out these dance challenges? On the face of it, they look a little silly, but they are all the rage. They've become very popular. And so that's how the whole conversation got started. Again, I have to be very clear. I do not dance. I do not have TikTok videos with me dancing. I look at this purely as a phenomenon that is um, interesting to study because it is so unique. It sort of combines all of these things that we think of as viral content, right? It's short, it's appealing, it's got dance, it's got music. It's a lot of it is very passionate. Like these people who actually do these dance challenges are the young people. They're very passionate. They completely sort of believe in what they're doing. The music is catchy. So when you think about what can go viral, it has all of the elements that you need for something to go viral. And so that's where we got started with this notion of a hashtag dance challenge.
Professor, your core outcome is Spotify followership growth.
Mm.
Why did you choose daily follower changes as the key
Yeah.
measure of traction in the
Mm.
digital music marketplace?
So that's a good question, right? So if you think about it in our paper, what we do is we look at activity on one platform and see how activity on one platform influences behavior on a different platform, right? So in some ways, this is sort of a spillover effect of activity on one platform. Now, the reason we looked at Spotify is because in the music industry, increasingly as people stop buying CDs. I mean, most of us are on Spotify or SoundCloud or one of these streaming platforms. A measure of traction, how influential a musician is, or what sort of market space they are able to command, is driven by how many followers they are able to attract on Spotify. So if you think about it, if you are a emerging musician or you're a young musician, you're trying to break into the industry, uh, Spotify followership becomes a measure that is tracked by record companies, that is tracked by by other platforms. It is tracked by people that are willing to attend concerts, right? So in that sense, we are looking at an outcome that number one has sort of a business element to it. It actually does measure how successful you are. That's one. Second is, given the fact that most of these people that we are studying are actually on the younger side. So these are all obviously, these are sort of people in their late teens and 20s who are trying to break into the music market. Uh, Spotify is incredibly popular in this demographic, right? So in some ways, it's not my time where we used to buy CDs. I mean, this is like the new generation where Spotify is sort of the place. It has become sort of the de facto marketplace for music consumption, right? And we were looking at, well, if you are a musician and you're trying to break in, you're naturally doing things to attract audiences. Right? So, as a natural course of activity, you're going to have a certain amount of growth in your user followers, right? So, the number of people. So, today you have 3, then you have 10, 15, and 20. So, you have sort of a natural curve in terms of your growth. What is it that can shift this curve upwards, right? So there are two ways to think about shifting the curve. One is, of course, that I shift the whole curve. I just sort of parallelly move it up, which is a short-term effect. Like, you just get 100 new followers and then you sort of go back to the same curve. The other potentially more influential outcome would be if I'm able to shift the curve itself higher. So the slope of the curve actually goes up, which means your rate of growth itself is getting higher, right? Which is more compelling because in some ways it tells you that you're able to grow faster, right? So what we decided to do was we decided to look at outcomes on Spotify followership growth rates because to a certain extent that is more of an important criteria that might determine how much traction a musician is able to get rather than just looking at a one-time hit. The one-time hit is like a sugar rush. You eat some sugar, you get a hit, but that's not sustainable. But hopefully, shifting the curve upwards is a little bit more sustainable. So there was a lot of discussion and thought behind how do we measure the implications of a dance challenge, right? And so we sort of, many combinations and permutations and discussions, we sort of came upon this specific measure of business-oriented market traction that might occur, that might accrue to, you know, growing and burgeoning musicians who are trying to break into the market. Does that answer your question? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely perfect.
I'm giving
Perfect.
you like the 2.5, 3 years of work on a paper. I'm giving you sort of the 30-second version of the answer.
Perfect, perfect, sir. Thank you. How do you identify a moment a new HDC begin for a song? And how do you
Uh,
think the TikTok event to subsequent changes in an artist Spotify followers?
how do you identify the moment an HTC dance challenge shows up? That's a tough question, actually, right? Because so thankfully, in our case, we didn't have to do that work. We actually worked with a company that made its money selling access to data where HTC dance challenges would show up, right? In fact, I think TikTok at that point, I'm talking about this is 3 or 4 years ago, was encouraging more and more of its users to come up with dance challenges. Because even for TikTok, what a dance challenge does is it increases traffic on the site. So you have an attractive dance challenge, it becomes a rage, it becomes viral. More people come to TikTok just to see the dance challenge. And once they are there, there's a higher probability that they will sign on, they will become part of TikTok's community, which is what they want, right? So I think a lot of these things are viral. So for instance, when you add a dance challenge, right? So supposing I were to create a dance challenge and I'm saying, look, I'm going to take one of Taylor Swift's videos or songs and I'm going to create a 30-second dance clip. I actually tag Taylor Swift, or I tag Shakira, or I tag whoever, Michael Jackson, right? So I tag the artist. Now, as a third person on the platform, if I tend to follow Shakira or I tend to follow Taylor Swift, the fact that there is a new tag with Taylor Swift on it, even though it is provided not by Taylor Swift's company, but by a third person, it shows up on my feed. So the initial impulse to go viral is based on how strategically users tag things, right? And so there are a lot of these elements that work out well, at least with dance challenges, for the individuals who post them, the artist who sort of benefits from having his or her music featured. And in some way, the platform gains too, because the platform essentially is able to use this to attract more and more people to the platform, right? So but tracking and collecting this data is non-trivial. I think it's not that simple. Thankfully, marketing analytics companies have like whole teams that do this. So we were lucky in that we were able to work with one of these companies, Chartmetrics, I think, to get some of their data for a 6-month period.
Professor, your findings show that artists featured in new HDC see a significant increase in Spotify followership versus similar artists not featured. How did you construct the similar artist comparison grid?
Okay, so that's a fair point. So a lot of strict controls had to be put in place just to make sure that we were able to compare apples to apples, right? So you don't want to randomly compare two songs. I have to sort of provide a caveat up front. When you think about creative stuff like music, video, movies, right? By definition, when you talk about creative products, finding an exact match between one creative product and another creative product is always going to be hard, right? I mean, you're always sort of hoping that you can create this, in academics, we call it sort of a control and treatment dyad. You're hoping that you can do this as cleanly as possible. Now, if I was thinking about creating a match for something that is fairly straightforward, a cup, a coffee cup, right? I mean, it's clearly defined, it's straightforward, it's much easier. With creative stuff, with creative products, it's much harder to find this, right? So that being said, I think that is sort of a caveat across the paper, which is to say we are talking about creative work. By definition, some of this, it's hard to pin down exactly. So what we ended up doing was we looked at songs that were used in an HTC on TikTok, which became sort of our focal unit. That's what we are interested in. Then we created a set of songs that were present on TikTok or posted on TikTok at the same time, but not through the format of the HTC, right? So you have essentially two songs that were both present on TikTok around the same time period, give or take 1 or 2 days, around the same time period. One was through an HTC and the other was not through an HTC. Now, we ensured that in our sample, we did not pick a situation where the same artist had, say, 5 songs on TikTok at the same time. Because then it would be hard to disentangle the effect of one song. You're now looking at 5 songs. Thankfully, in the time period that we were studying TikTok, we were able to find quite a lot of cases where artists had one song on TikTok during that time interval, right? So, part of this is also making sure that we are clearly focusing on the specific sample that we want to study. right? So we pulled out bands, we pulled out from our sample, we pulled out all those cases where you had multiple songs, so that because then you can't really get clear effect. It's all, the effect is sort of confounded, it's muddled, right? So what we had was for any given song that showed up on TikTok through the HTC, we had a control of a song that showed up on TikTok without the HTC. And then we also had a song that showed up on Spotify at that time without TikTok. So we had these three sets of songs, right? So our most important sample would be the songs that show up on TikTok with an HTC. The second is the songs that show up on TikTok without an HTC. And then the third is songs that show up on Spotify without TikTok. And by selectively comparing across these, we can hopefully, sort of bring out the effect of having an HTC. Now, part of the challenge here is how do I ensure that these two songs are similar? As I said, in creative stuff, it's always hard. But, the good thing about a lot of the online data now, the good thing about analytics is for each of these songs that is posted, we have a whole set of parameters that we can use to characterize the song, right? So for instance, were there vocals? How fast is the beat? Were there instrumentals? Is it what is the tone of the lyrics? Is it angry? Is it romantic? Is it whatever uplifting? What is the acoustic quality of the recording? Right? What is the what is the approximate genre of the song? So there's like 8 or 10 parameters that characterize each song. So when we picked a match between the control and the treatment group, we made sure that we matched on each of these 10 parameters. And so I think in the paper, we actually show a chart where when you look at the final set of similar songs that are selected, we try and make sure they are as similar as possible to the actual songs that show up through an HTC. So hopefully we are sort of providing a valid comparison of apples to apples, as opposed to just randomly picking a bunch of songs and randomly picking another bunch of songs and saying, here's an effect. That would not fly, right? So, I mean, when you don't have a perfect experiment, you have to resort to some of these statistical techniques to make sure that you are comparing, similar articles or similar objects, except one object has the treatment or the intervention that you're looking for, and the other object doesn't. Is that making sense? I mean,
Yes, yeah, yes, Professor.
so it's actually there's a great deal of work that goes into ensuring as tightly as possible that you're able to rule out other sources of influence, so that what is left on the table, like Sherlock Holmes says, I think if you remove everything else, what's left on the table has to be the answer. So that's sort of the philosophy that we adopt.
Professor, you apply role congruity theory to
Mm.
argue women artists
Yeah.
may benefit more from HDCs.
Yeah.
What is intuition here in plain terms? And what
Okay.
would you expect to see if role congruity didn't matter?
Okay, so role congruity theory is something that has been studied in psychology for quite a while, and it's actually it's a fairly robust phenomenon in general, and it's quite unfortunate that it is this robust, right? It's based on stereotyping, right? So we typically think of certain stereotypes, and we apply these stereotypes to people that we meet when we make evaluations or when we make judgments, right? So this is something I try in my class, and I'm teaching MBA students. I try this in my class. I say, go to one of these AI image generators, like DALI, like that produces images, right? You give it a prompt and you say, okay, give me the image of a horse, and it'll produce an image of a horse. If you tell this image generator, give me an image of 5 CEOs sitting around a table discussing something important, that's my prompt. What would you expect to get, right? And for the most part, you'll end up actually getting 4 male CEOs and 1 female CEO, right? Why is it 4 male and 1 female, right? If I were to change the question and say, hey, give me a photograph or an image of 5 nurses, chances are you're going to get 4 female nurses and 1 male nurse, right? And what this is really showing is there is a sense of role congruity. We expect certain roles and certain behaviors to be consistent with certain kinds of people, right? And that's a stereotype that is always perpetuated. I mean, there are these stories about how surgeons are always assumed to be men versus nurses are always assumed to be women. Teachers are assumed to be women versus, people who work in finance are assumed to be men, just because, right? And why is that? So the idea here is there are these stereotypes that we associate with gender. So we expect women, and I say we, I don't mean me, but in general, like the collective, we expect women to be nurturing, to be gentle, to be holistically inclined. We expect them to be, soft spoken. We expect them to be nice. We expect men to be aggressive. We expect them to be masculine, right? Like the CEOs typically tend to have beards. Again, it's one of those things that is a stereotype. We expect men to be a little bit more of a dominant personality. We expect them to be more aggressive, more in charge, right? And when that, so if I'm looking at somebody and they are behaving in a way that is congruous to the role that I have ascribed to them as part of my stereotyping behavior, my response is positive. When they operate in a way that is role incongruous, my response is negative. Right? So, for instance, when and there are articles on this, when you see women CEOs get angry, they are viewed negatively, whereas when male CEOs get angry, they are viewed as being authoritative, right? So the same behavior exhibited by different people of different gender gets different treatment, because in one case the behavior is role congruous, and in the other case the behavior is role incongruous. Now, of course, this is not to say that this is how it should be. I mean, obviously, these are stereotypes that need reevaluation. And they also are, in many ways, harmful. In fact, a lot of the role incongruity and congruity literature talks about how stereotyping and role congruity theory outlines places where it is harmful to people. And it's harmful in both ways. Women CEOs are viewed as role incongruous, and male nurses are viewed as incongruous, right? So essentially, in this particular case, the argument is that when you see somebody dancing, why is it important to think about it from the perspective of role congruity? Is because can we make the argument that role congruity has a role in how I evaluate dancers or how I evaluate people who are dancing, right? And that's sort of we, in order to try and explain why there might be a difference in how hashtag dance challenges are appreciated by the average, user on TikTok, to the point where it might translate to the person going on Spotify, finding that artist and becoming a follower. The differences across gender is likely to be associated with what we think of when we think of either a male musician or a female musician, or a male dancer or a female dancer. And that is rooted in the sense of stereotyping. So role congruity sort of becomes a very simple answer. I mean, generally as academics, we are looking for simple answers. We don't want very complicated answers. So that becomes a simple way to actually see, well, do I have a reaction based on the stereotypes that I've held? And the stereotypes I've held are based on what I've seen in the world around me and what has been sort of what I've been conditioned into. Right? So I mean, I think there's a great deal of work in psychology that actually talks about role congruity in many, many different contexts. We sort of use it in this particular context.
Professor, you observe that women creators drive the effect, boosting daily Spotify follower growth by about 3% more for women artists.
Mm-hmm.
How should listeners interpret that 3%? Is it relative growth? And what does it mean that realistic follower counts?
Yeah. So it is. So the fact that it's a percentage means it is actually one can compare across people, right? So one of the issues that we dealt with here is we first get rid of superstars. So in our database, we get rid of like Taylor Swift, because obviously you have to account for the fact that the top 10% of the population just has very different numbers. So you get rid of those. So what you're left with are a bunch of people who are musicians who have produced stuff, who have produced music and are featured on Spotify, but are not like superstars or not have not hit that level as yet, right? And so they're trying to make traction. Um, the Even with this group that is left, there's a great deal of heterogeneity. There's a great deal of variation in how many followers they have, right? So you might have 300 followers. I'll have 10. Somebody else might have 150, right? So you're looking at a great deal of variation between even people that have 300 to 500 followers versus people that have 20, right? So we had to find a way to normalize this. And the only way, the simplest way to normalize it is to say, okay, let's look at percentages. Okay. Now, what does that mean? Now, the average growth rate not in the Taylor Swift categories or the Shakira categories, but in the average musicians categories, the average growth, day-to-day growth in followership is actually quite small, right? So it works out to something like 1.5, 2 people per day if you look at the complete sample. So it's not very big, right? So the 3% is actually a relatively small number when you apply it to one individual. What we talk about in the paper is what the 3% represents if you look at it over, say, 1,000 musicians, is actually a significant increase in traffic on Spotify and a significant increase in traffic for that particular artist, right? So remember, it's 3% per day. So over a 2-week period, that compounds to, over 40 to 50% increase. So if you start with 10 followers and you are lucky enough to have a hashtag dance challenge that is posted on TikTok with your music, remember, we are not even actually having to worry about that particular hashtag going viral. Just saying there is a hashtag that is posted. Posting that hashtag is going to, over the 2-week period subsequent to the posting of the hashtag, is going to give you a 50% increase in your followership. So if you're starting at 20, you're going to end up with 30, right? Now, from 20 to 30, does it really matter? I think that's the next question. It's just, who cares? I mean, it's just such a small number. How does it matter? The argument that we make is it matters because when it comes to creative work, when it comes to music, for instance, there is a network effect. So each of those new followers has the probability or the propensity to actually bring in one additional follower. So if I have 10 new followers at the end of a week, each of those 10 people by themselves are not static elements. They actually have the capacity to bring in more people. So what you have is this exponential effect, right? You start small, and then, the more people you bring in, the higher the probability that you'll bring in even more people. So that compounds, right? So it's almost like, it's actually compounding is sort of the right word. It's like compound interest. It compounds. And that is what people have shown in the past. That is what traction means, right? So you have a situation where 6 months ago, the company didn't exist. In 3 months, they've got 10 customers. In the next 3 months, they've got 40 customers. The next 3 months, they've got 200 customers. So you want that sort of, you want that exponential rate of growth. And what the dance challenge does is it actually pulls in people and helps you get that motion helps you get that curve in motion. So, at some point, even we also say this in the paper, attributing specific numbers is very hard because you have people with 10 followers and you also have people with 1,000 followers. Taylor Swift has I don't know, 10 million followers. So that's a different, Jennifer Lopez, Taylor Swift, they just have billions. That's a different category altogether. We remove those people. But even in this group, there's actually quite a bit of variance. But the fact of the matter is that if you start high, then the 3% is actually going to add a lot. If you start small, the 3% will still add, except it will compound over the 2 or 3 weeks where we do our study. We don't have the capacity to look at this long term and say in 6 months, in a year, what will happen? Because in 6 months, so much else can change. right? So in general, in all of these studies, I mean, it would be great to be able to say, look, you provide a hashtag dance challenge, and in a year you become a superstar. That would be lovely to study, but it's statistically not very easy to make that case. But we have some. I don't know if you're familiar with this music. Have you heard of an artist called Doja Cat?
Yes, I have heard.
Up to Sunai. Okay, so Doja Cat is apparently one of those examples where she became sort of a breakout star through a hashtag dance challenge for one of her songs, right? And that essentially, I mean, she had music released, she had a couple of albums, and she was sort of middling. And then this dance challenge hit, and then she sort of rode that curve. So that's the argument that we're trying to make.
Professor, what are the boundary conditions? In what
Mm.
scenarios might HDCs not help women artists as much? For example, certain genres, artist maturity levels, or different
Mhm.
baseline popularity.
So I think the baseline popularity is certainly important. I think there are so in all of our sample, when we look at the songs we have in our sample, the overwhelming majority of them are pop, right? So it's primarily Western pop. So it doesn't seem to make a difference when you're talking about classical music. It doesn't seem to make a difference when you're talking about gospel. It certainly not does not include hip hop, right? Which is interesting because a lot of hip hop has to do with dance, but it doesn't seem to show up. The one other angle that we took is this notion of what happens when the hashtag dance challenge is actually created by the artist himself or herself. Right? So imagine if you were to create a dance challenge with your own song and you put that on TikTok. Does the fact that you created your own dance challenge make it more attractive because it is potentially more authentic? And we actually don't see that happen. So there is no premium attached to the artist himself or herself providing a dance challenge. So in some ways, the democratization of activity on social media seems to be an important factor here, right? So if I do it for you, it seems to do better than you doing it for yourself, right? Of course, my co-authors have an explanation for that, and they talk about this notion of the self-promotion penalty. So generally speaking, and in fact, that is also a very robust, it's a very robust effect, unfortunately. And I see it, I've seen it in our setting where we have online classes. So during COVID, we moved a lot of our teaching online, and there is research showing that when you do teaching online, um, female TAs or teaching assistants or female instructors teaching the same material get systematically lower ratings, right? But the self promotion penalty essentially argues that when women indulge in self promotion or when they are trying to promote themselves, self promotion is viewed as role incongruous. So it is okay for a man to praise himself and promote himself because that is considered to be congruous with sort of masculine attributes. But it's not okay for a woman to do it, right? And so I think there was this argument we made that when a female artist creates her own dance challenge, hashtag dance challenge, you have these two forces that cancel out, right? The one there is people feel that, oh, she's promoting herself, which is role incongruous, but it's dance, which is role congruous. And so effectively, there is no visible effect. So in that sense, it appears that the effect is really strong when it comes to women providing dance challenges for female artists where the genre is pop, the acoustics and the danceability are high. So it's actually a sort of a peppy number. And it is, we didn't specifically test for this, but we actually found it in our data. It is not on a relatively sensitive topic, right? So it has to be sort of light and fun. If you have a dance challenge on like racism, it doesn't work. So other things take over. Like, so you want to make sure that the music that you're selecting has all of these properties. Is that answering your question? So I think it's a reasonable question to say, where are the limits? Like, where are the boundary conditions? And I think we find some of those in our analysis.
Professor, what do your results suggest women artists and their teams should do differently on TikTok? Should they
Ah,
seed challenges, collaborate with
yes.
women creators, or design music snippets tailored for dance virality?
So yes, I think even the Doja Cat example is actually, it's sparked off a lot of other cases where other emerging artists have figured out that maybe this is a way to do it, right? So one can think about multiple stakeholders here, right? One is the platform. The other are female artists, and the third are neutral people like us, who are sort of, say, policymakers, or people who are looking at this and trying to sort of enhance welfare, if you will, right? So I'm trying to increase general sort of welfare. Uh, I think for the platform, uh, dance challenges are great because they increase eyeballs, they increase visibility. Um, Given the presence of in congruity, role congruity for the platform, it our data shows that dance challenges that feature women dancing to other women seems to be the ideal. So that creates a great deal of traction. It creates a great deal of buzz. Even traffic on TikTok goes up. Dance challenges created by women for male artists is better than dance challenges created for male artists by males, right? So in that sense, I think for the platform, there is clearly some benefit in trying to feature more and more women creating these dance challenges, even if they are not the original artists, but just to have more and more women, because that creates traction on the platform. And that creates a great deal of traffic. And then generally, sort of, you can use role congruity to help, as opposed to instances in the past where role congruity has been basically used to hurt people. Right? It's not been great for female for users. So uh, for if you are a creator, if you are a musician, then arguably what our results show is you're better off having a marketing team that actually pays other people to create these dance challenges for you. So it's not as advantageous for you to do it yourself. If you have a group that is willing to say, okay, I'm going to hire 3 or 4 people and have them create these challenges using my music, there's on the margin a higher effect of increasing your followership. Of course, this is also a little bit cynical because as you can imagine on social media, too much manipulation doesn't work. So I think authenticity is important. So the moment the audience starts to feel that this is not authentic and there's sort of manipulation on the back end, things can fall apart. So for musicians, for artists, our advice is, look, do this selectively, and don't assume that every dance challenge is going to go viral. It doesn't, right? But this is an opportunity as long as you don't abuse it. From a policymaker's perspective, right? If I were to take sort of the Pareto, in some ways, I think this is allowing us to identify situations where role congruity, which has always sort of been detrimental to women, in this case actually works better for women. So in that sense, if we can create more role congruous content, right, or find ways to enhance the role congruity between content and intention, right? So supposing I want, say, your podcast to go viral, it would sort of make sense to have, at least in on the margin, create some level of role congruity, right? Now, to the extent that you can manipulate this is great, but it's a slippery curve because, I mean, it's a slippery slope because some of these things are also changing. So let me go back to my initial example of where we use this images, right? So we say I go to Dali and I say, give me an image of 5 CEOs. The first time I did this exercise in my class was in 2023, I think 2023 summer. And I got, sure enough, 4 CEOs that were male and 1 female CEO. The 4 CEOs that were male were looking very stern and in control. And the 1 female CEO was smiling, which is again role congruous, right? You expect women to be smiling and to be, nice. whereas men look better when they are looking like they are in charge. If you were to do the same thing now, it's actually changed. So now the ratios will be 3 men, 2 women. And because the training data set itself has changed, right? So essentially what I'm saying is that these things are not in equilibrium. The equilibrium itself is always shifting, right? So things are always changing. So from a central planner or a welfare perspective, I think it is useful to consider where in social media one can find ways to shift content that allows you to benefit from role congruity. Also realizing that that might not always be the case. There are going to be places where role congruity is going to hurt you. There's not a whole lot you can do around that because some of this is based on stereotyping, and stereotypes are incredibly resistant to change in the short term. It takes a long time for these stereotypes to change. So it's it's an interesting world because so much changes. Forms of delivery change. Along the time that we were doing hashtag dance challenges on TikTok, there was a lot of these other platforms are also getting into reels and short videos, and they were all sort of going down the same pathway. And I think in one of our analyses, we tried to pull in data from reels to see if we could find similar data, but we weren't able to actually control the environment to the point where we were able to make comparisons, right? But I think that's the point is, if you can engineer for role congruity, if to the extent that you can, you're going to be better off. And in this particular case, interestingly, role congruity actually helps women artists who have always traditionally been handicapped in the music industry because they've always been told that self-promotion is bad. And so that's always held them back. So they are required to be congruous with sort of female stereotypes. And that's always been a problem. So, it's an interesting world, but, I think it's also changing. So in that sense, maybe in 2 or 3 years, I should ask EFA to go back and redo the study just to see if anything has changed on TikTok.
Professor Anandasivam Gopal, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your research on how TikTok's hashtag dance challenges can shape artist discovery and inclusivity in the digital music marketplace. Your insights on why these challenges can translate into measurable gains, especially for women artists, and particularly when women creators are involved, were both timely and thought-provoking. We truly appreciate your time and clarity you brought to the conversation. Thank you again, Professor, and we look forward to sharing this episode with our listeners. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Deepak. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good luck.